Hi everyone, it's Mr. Banish, and in this podcast we're going to take a look at storms. To start with, a storm is a violent disturbance in the atmosphere. So there's a change in the atmosphere, and usually that change is going to be a change in air pressure. And in our previous section, we learned that there are very large pockets of air that we call air masses that have different temperatures and humidities and also different dew points and also different densities. And so when these collide with one another, they produce a front. And there are different fronts: cold fronts, warm fronts, stationary fronts, occluded fronts. But when these bang into each other, they oftentimes will produce a lot of clouds and moisture and even storms. So a thunderstorm is a small storm that is often accompanied by heavy precipitation. So when you have those two air masses that collide with one another, they produce the fronts, and oftentimes a thunderstorm will occur. And this is a picture of a bunch of different clouds that are here. You can see that there are some cumulonimbus clouds that are starting to develop. Here's the cumulus, the nimbus part is coming up towards the top. Another part of a thunderstorm oftentimes is lightning, and by definition, lightning is a sudden spark or electrical discharge, and these jump basically from cloud to cloud, or from ground to cloud, or from cloud to ground. And so oftentimes they're moving in different ways. And so this is a couple of different examples. Up towards the top of the cloud there are a lot of positive charges, and what will happen sometimes is that the negative charges dominate towards the bottom, and so there's exchanges that will occur from the ground, or from the cloud to the ground, or from the ground to the cloud, and they're attracted to these negative charges. And so we talk a lot of times about electrons that are jumping from a cloud to another cloud, or from the cloud to ground, or from the ground to the cloud. And if we have these different charges that are attracted to one another, we're oftentimes going to experience lightning. And we experience that at a much lower level sometimes. If our feet drag on the carpeting and all of a sudden we go to touch the metal door, we will experience that there's a shock, and so there's static electricity, and this is a form of lightning, except for the fact that it's at a much higher and much broader sense when we look at lightning in our atmosphere. This picture is an example of a thunderstorm that had gone through. Sometimes thunderstorms produce enough lightning that they actually strike trees and can actually tear apart the tree, and this is an example of also winds that are very strong during a thunderstorm that have the potential to knock over trees. So a lot of damage can be done in severe thunderstorms. Some tips for lightning safety. A lot of times you want to make sure that you avoid being outside. Make sure you're not holding metal objects. You want to make sure that you go indoors and try to stay away from things that are high up off the ground or have metal that are attached to them. And you can read over the other safety tips of lightning. Another type of storm is a tornado, and we watched several parts of Storm Chasers, and you kind of got a sense of how they form. But a tornado is a rapid whirling funnel-shaped cloud that reaches down from storm clouds. And we learned that the storm clouds are oftentimes cumulonimbus clouds, and what they need is this upward movement, or what they refer to as an updraft of air that is going to mix with the cold air, and as it starts to do that, it feeds up enough of it that it actually produces these types of winds that becomes circular. And once that it becomes vertical with these circular wind shears, it can actually turn the cloud on its side, which is what a funnel cloud is. And a funnel cloud is basically a cloud that gets spun around, and it is going to come from the sky to the ground. And because of the fact that the wind speeds are so high, it causes all kinds of damage. And it might not be on the ground for a long period of time, but when it is touching the ground, it has the potential to be extremely dangerous, knocking over houses, flipping cars, destroying basically anything in its path. And so a tornado is basically a rapid whirling funnel-shaped cloud that reaches down from a storm cloud, and it all deals with getting this updraft of warmer air, cooler air mixed together, and it starts the turning process. Tornado Alley in the United States extends from part of Texas all the way up through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, even part of Minnesota and Iowa. And a lot of the reason why it is considered that area, notice that we have our warm front here, and there's a lot of warm, moist air that comes off of the Gulf of Mexico. It combines along with this warm, dry air. So if you start to put in our terminology that this warm, moist air would be tropical, with our moist air maritime, so a maritime tropical, and our warm dry air, so continental tropical, along with the cold dry air, so continental polar air starts to mix together, and when the jet stream kicks down low enough, it starts to produce these tornadoes because it has enough of the moisture, it has enough of the warm, really dry air, and it has the cool air that starts to mix together. You combine that with wind speeds, it's going to start to produce a tornado. So Tornado Alley, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, part of Iowa, and also Minnesota. This is a picture that was taken from a tornado that had passed through, and you can see how devastating and damaging that these can become. Some of the tornado safety rules, make sure you understand that the difference between a watch and a warning. In the tornado watch scenario, it means that tornadoes are possible in the area that you live. So make sure that you're paying attention to the weather, all right? Be ready to move to safety. Tornado warnings basically mean that a tornado has either been spotted or there has been one that is already touched down on the ground. So it has been developed and you should seek shelter immediately. Some of the advice that is given during a tornado, don't follow what the storm chasers do. All right, we learned that they are very, very trained professionals that know what they're doing, and they have some equipment that's a little bit more safer than just driving around in your vehicle. But you should go to the basement, get away from glass, make sure that you're under a sturdy place. If you're outside, get out of your car, get to a ditch, get to the lowest place that you possibly can, and make sure that you protect yourself and be in a low place where there isn't going to be debris that can potentially hit you. Another type of storm that we need to know about is called a hurricane, and a hurricane is a tropical cyclone that has winds of 119 kilometers. It begins over warm ocean waters as a low pressure area, or what is known as a tropical disturbance. And so here we have our warm ocean waters that have to be at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit or more. They're going to provide energy because there's going to be a lot of evaporation. So there's going to be a ton of evaporation that's occurring because you have this humid air, and what's going to happen is that you're going to have winds that are going to start to force this upward. So very similar to a tornado, you have to have that upward warmth of air, and what's going to start to happen is that the wind flow out is going to start to move out and away from the area where it's rising. So it's going to start to produce this area, a very large area of warm, moist air, and then the humid air is going to continue rising, making the cloud of a storm. So we start to see that it is a huge storm cloud. And then what eventually happens is that you have winds that begin to steer and let this type of cloud get bigger and bigger, and because of the winds it starts to rotate. And you know, it's different than a tornado because of the fact that they form over water and they're fed by the warm water that continues to get moisture to continue to develop to get the cloud that is going to start to rotate. And there is something that's called the eye of the hurricane. The eye of the hurricane is basically an area where it is very calm, and it's where the moisture is been feeding into it. So the area where the moisture feeds into it, because all that other moisture is starting to move away from it, and it's creating this basically this open area for it. And so a hurricane is a tropical cyclone, and it forms over warm ocean water. This is an example of where a hurricane has come ashore. You'll notice that a lot of times flooding, they call it a storm surge, where the surge of water begins to flood the area. As it comes onto shore, it's like a major thunderstorm that's going to produce lots of flooding, high-speed winds. It's going to have thunder and lightning and rain. And once it comes over land, it starts to lose its energy because there's no longer that warm water that is evaporating and feeding it the energy that it needs. But a lot of times it's so large that it'll take a few states before it runs out of energy. So a lot of times there's rain and thunderstorms that are produced that end up traveling all the way to the middle part of the United States, and even sometimes even up towards Wisconsin, we'll see some of the rain and showers that could come from having a hurricane hit the land. They're much wider than tornadoes, but tornadoes have much higher wind speeds, and so while both of them are dangerous, this is an example of a hurricane. The last one that we need to talk about are snowstorms, and we're familiar with snowstorms. The dangers of them is that obviously the roads begin to become extremely snow covered. Visibility when it's snowing extremely hard becomes hard to see, but also if we have ice, it can cause power lines to collapse because of the weight of the ice and because of the fact that they're frozen, and the weight of them will cause them to fall over. And so you have to be extremely careful in these scenarios because of the fact that the power lines are still very active and could potentially cause someone to become electrocuted if they were to touch those. And you have to make sure that you plan smartly if you're going to be traveling. Make sure that you have extra blankets that are in the car. Make sure that you dress appropriately in case something would happen where your car was not able to start and you were a long distance away from an area where you could get help. So it's suggested that during snowstorms that you pack wisely. So that is it for storms. Make sure that you go through all of the slides, take down the notes, and also make sure that you spend some time doing your reflection, including things like what you learned from it, specifically what you learned about it, what you really understood, and what you struggle to understand. Remember, I read through everyone's I struggle to understand, so it helps to give me an idea of what sorts of things you would like me to go over in class. Alright? Talk to you later.